Father Kirby, good to see you again. Thanks for being here to talk to the TAN followers about some voting issues. Today we're going to talk about the number one issue. It's the issue of human dignity and life. I mean, what about abortion? What about euthanasia? And if there's anything that's on the ballot on November 3rd, it is that. Now, I've heard a recent video. We posted one of your homilies recently to our YouTube channel, and you were given a rock and roll of a homily on certain issues. But you mentioned about the sacredness and dignity of life, and how voters, Catholic voters, you must follow the church teaching when it comes to supporting pro-choice political candidates, and we can't get around it. I mean, I just feel like so many mental gymnastics are being attempted by Catholic politicians and Catholics in the pews to justify their support of a pro-choice candidate, and we got to speak straight about it. Because if we can't speak straight about the slaughter of a young baby in a mother's womb, then I don't know what we can talk straight about. So why don't you help us out here? Why don't you give us some foundational points on church teaching about the issue of life? And maybe I'll just kind of give you the segue of people talk about being a one issue voter. So help us with that. Are we one issue voters, or is there another way to articulate that?
So two things. So first, to take from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we are told, and we know as Catholics, that life is the first and fundamental right. So it means we have to get the issues surrounding life correct, or we have no foundation upon which to argue any other moral issue. Because if we don't get life right, again, there's just no foundation. Also, just chronologically, if we don't get especially the beginning of life right, then we're not going to get any of our other moral arguments right. So literally, chronologically, in terms of preeminence, in terms of the foundation of moral credibility, it all begins with the first and fundamental right of life. Drawing from that, the U.S. bishops use the term the preeminent issue. I think it's so important that Catholics know this, that the U.S. bishops, emphasizing the universal teaching, speaks of the preeminent issue of life, and specifically the beginning of life with abortion. So when people try to sound so enlightened, and we have these Catholics who really don't believe in life, who don't want to argue for life, who don't want to lose their reputations because they defend life, they pretend and they want to sound so enlightened and so above us, and they sound so elitist when they describe as if, well, I'm not a one issue voter, or they say of themselves, I personally am opposed, but I have to represent my constituents. Oh, okay, so if all your constituents agreed that slavery was acceptable, would you therefore vote for slavery? Oh, well, no, that's evil. Well, exactly, exactly, right? There are some moral aspects of truth that are beyond consensus. And so first, that whole argument of I personally, but I have to represent the people who voted me in, we've dismantled that. But then also this, I'm a one issue voter. No, that they're not going to be this one issue voter. We hear that again. I hear that a lot among the faithful. This is important, but we can't be a one issue voter. And again, it's all just garbage. What it shows is that their hearts have not yet been consecrated to the gospel of life. We literally speak of Jesus. In St. Peter's second apostolic homily in the Acts of the Apostles, he praises Jesus as the author of life. In the first Eucharistic prayer, as it's concluding, we speak that God has blessed us and filled us with life. So we acknowledge that life is the first and fundamental. It's not just a one issue issue or a situation or area. We would speak of that it's a preeminent, and to help people in case that word's definition gets lost, like preeminent means it is before all others. It has a dignity, a prominence, a seniority before all others. And Connor, I'll tell you, we've got to get this back in the Catholic, into the minds and the hearts of the Catholic faithful. Like, we have always been a people of life. You go back to the early church. I mean, we were the ones who took care of the widows and the orphans. I mean, the Didache, around 70 AD, it was written. It predates John's gospel. It condemns abortion. Christians didn't abort their children. We didn't expose the elderly out into the elements. We were known as a people of life. People thought we were weird. They mocked us because we cared for all life, because we saw it as a gift from God. Following the Jewish tradition, we were the few in terms of ancient cultures, the Judeo-Christian tradition, that condemned suicide. There was no honor in Judaism or in Christianity to take one's life. That was unique. In all other cultures, it was an honor. If you somehow offended your family, you took your life. But among Christians, as among Jews, it was not, because life was a gift from God. God was the author of life. We have to retrieve that, and we have to remind ourselves that the beginning of life, questions of abortion, is a preeminent issue. It means if a political candidate does not get that one right, then a well-formed conscience of the faithful should immediately detect it and refuse to support it.
Boom. Drop that mic. Right? So here's rhetorical question. Must I vote for a pro-life candidate? Not must I go and vote for a particular pro-life candidate, or can I refrain from voting?
Yeah. So in moral theology, this also helps some people. We speak of a heresy, a false teaching called proportionalism. And this very much is in our minds as Americans, because we are, by culture, utilitarians. We're very pragmatic as a people. So sometimes in moral theology, proportionalism, we don't even realize how it's seducing our minds, because we think, well, if someone gets all these other issues right, then okay, and you know what, and they didn't get the question of abortion right. Well, all these other issues kind of proportionately kind of outweigh the moral evil of this act or of this lack of support, right? And again, that's proportionalism, because no, truth is truth. There's a hierarchy of truth, and the first and fundamental right is life. That means if we have two candidates and one is pro-life and one is not, the well-formed conscience of the Christian believer will vote for the one who is pro-life. The church even goes farther. If someone votes for a pro-abortion politician because they are pro-abortion, that's one step more.
More, yeah.
So they vote for this person because they're pro-death, because they support abortion. That person's excommunicated. That person is removed from the communion of the church, because that is such a grievous violation of our fundamental mission as Christians to defend the vulnerable and the weak, to guard and cherish life, that they are not a part of us. They have separated themselves from us, because that belief, that argument, that vote is so fundamentally opposed to the core of who we are, that person's excommunicated. So again, you just see in that further step how serious the church takes this, that life is the first and fundamental right. Now, does that mean that, hey, when we look at a candidate, that's all we should be focused on? No, we have to be attentive to the other issues, because even if we have to vote for one person, and maybe some of the other issues aren't right according to our moral teaching, then we need to understand where that candidate stands, so that we can try to influence, try to direct, and try to bring about a greater harmony in that person's platform. But for us as Catholics, like that preeminent issue, we take that very seriously.
So in regards to abortion, isn't you were kind of talking about a minute ago, but any kind of participation in abortion, I think traditionally has been considered automatic excommunication. If you drive your girlfriend to the abortionist clinic, if the mother influences the daughter to have that, how far does that go? So, if I donate money to Planned Parenthood, does that count versus I use an American Express donates money to Planned Parenthood, right? So it's this different degree of proximate or remote participation with evil.
Yes.
Seems like it comes up a lot. I mean, some people boycott any big business that supports abortion. If we were doing that, we probably couldn't have this show on YouTube because I'm sure there's some connection there. I mean, so at what point, do we say there's the line and I can't cross it?
Yes. So this is what we call moral theology, principles of cooperation. And as you indicated, there are different levels. So if I use American Express and it supports Planned Parenthood, that level of cooperation doesn't bring a moral guilt. I should be aware of it. And if I can use a different credit card, I should, but it doesn't bring with it a level of guilt. If I contribute to Planned Parenthood and I know that they are supporters of abortion, then I have guilt to bear. It's not to a level of excommunication. The excommunication is that you are directly involved. So as you indicated, a man drives his girlfriend to the clinic, or the parents of the girl pay for it,
Right.
and so on. Those bring about a direct excommunication. And Connor, I'll tell you, depending on what stats you want to look at, according to some statistics right now, Catholics, we are the highest ranking religious group that have abortions done. So we have not only strayed from our moral teaching, but we have grossly fallen away from the excellent way of love as Catholics. And I'll tell you, I am scandalized when I hear of a Catholic father. This just angers me, righteous anger. A Catholic father who forces his teenage daughter to have an abortion. Like, you are the grandfather. Like that office of grandfather and father, that is a moral office given to you by God. And to use that in order, to cause violence, not simply to your daughter, but to your unborn grandchild. And this happens a lot, Connor. To the point where Planned Parenthood will joke about the Catholic bishops say no, but every Catholic girl, wink, wink, says yes. So we've become a disgrace by our lack of witness.
How can that be? I mean, help me. All right. So I was going to ask you about why do priests and bishops wimp out on this, frankly? Why have, but to kind of prove that point that whatever you want to call it, they have wimped out. They have sold out to some degree. Is that stat you just gave? I mean, Catholics participate more in this than other religions. How can that be? I mean, help me understand how that stat could be true. I mean, it's just the opposite of, it's just hard for me to grasp. I really have a hard time, but I mean, it comes back, does it not, to the pastors at the pulpit, doesn't it? I mean, and why have they sold out on this issue over, since I get 1970 or so? I mean, why have they sold out on this issue in such vast numbers?
First of all, I wish I had a definitive answer on that, and regrettably, I can't find one, because I find it just so unfathomable that church leadership would be so silent on these matters. I'll give a few possible answers. I'll say this. I think it's ironic when we find certain bishops who speak critically of Pius XII for his supposed silence, which is not true, but his supposed silence on Nazism, but they are so quiet when it comes to the slaughter of the unborn. And in large part, Connor, I think what we're seeing is a lot of our church leadership just really do not believe in life. They don't believe in the gospel of life. Yeah. Unborn life is life, haha, wink, wink, like as if like that. It's not really life. Like, this isn't, poverty is a bigger issue than abortion, or climate change. How ridiculous is more important than abortion, and so on. And I see a large part what we do is we see hearts that are not consecrated to Christ. We see just a weakness and a compromise within leadership itself. And I don't like saying this, like, it grieves me, because I want a strong bishop. I want someone to speak. If I do something wrong, I want my bishop to correct me. And oftentimes what we find in the church throughout the United States and in many parts of the world, not everywhere, there are some pretty shining exceptions, but it just seems like bishops have just forgotten that they hold the apostolic authority. There is no other authority higher than what God has given to them. And it's been given to them in order to preach the gospel and to bring about the kingdom of God. So to protect evil, society from evil, and to promote good. Like, I don't get it. And I don't get it that if any Catholic were to say Roe versus Wade should be the law of the land, I don't know why that is not immediately and robustly and unequivocally condemned, and instead it goes unmentioned as if it's not important. Like I sometimes scratch my head and I look and I'm thinking, no wonder why so many of the faithful are having abortions and so many dads feel comfortable pressuring their daughters. And no wonder why so many of the faithful are so far from the gospel of Jesus Christ, because look at the leaders, right? As the shepherd, so the sheep. And that grieves me to say, and there's a part that I want to be wrong, but I look and the Lord tells us you can tell the tree by its fruit. And honestly, the trees are looking pretty barren.
Yeah. Before, Father, we've talked about the principle of subsidiarity. And, in regards to Roe v. Wade, that famous case, it's not only is it horrific because of what it does with the unborn, but it also is it's a grave violation of the principle of subsidiarity, because it takes away from the states something that many believe, and there's difference of opinions on it, legitimate different opinions, whether abortion should be a state or federal issue, but the Supreme Court yanks it away from the states and makes it a federal issue. So, what I find interesting is that good, conservative, pro-life Catholics can actually have a vibrant debate over whether, abortion should be a state issue or a federal issue. And just so some of the viewers understand how that can possibly be, murder is not a federal crime unless it's done with some kind of process of crossing state lines or through drug trafficking or some other crime that invokes federal jurisdiction. So, but rape and murder and, horrific things are state crimes because the federal government doesn't handle, all these issues. They leave it up to the states. Federal jurisdiction is only invoked at a certain point. So some people believe that, different language in the Constitution and amendments should apply to the unborn. Other people say, no, it's a state issue, just like murder is a state issue. So, there's interesting debate. That's an interesting debate, but I don't understand how it's interesting at all now to discuss whether abortion is right or wrong, or whether somebody can vote for a pro-choice candidate. It just seems so apparent to me. Now, another interesting thing is, I think that the two presidential candidates' views on these issues is pretty abundantly clear, and it shouldn't go left unsaid that Donald Trump was the first president to ever attend the pro-life march, the March for Life in Washington. It's kind of remarkable. And the judges, I think he's up to 300 federal judges now that he's appointed. They're probably pro-life personally, but in terms of their judicial philosophy, they are not trying to bring their own personal views. They're trying to allow the legislative process to govern, and they're trying to simply call balls and strikes like an umpire, in baseball. They're trying to be, a conservative jurist in the sense that they restrain themselves from legislating from the bench. So it seems to me that the abortion activists often are wearing black robes and sitting on benches. Okay, I mean that's very much an abortion activist safe haven, is for them to go on the bench and to find some kind of something in the Constitution, like they did in Roe v. Wade, talking about a penumbra emanating from the amendments, finding some way to justify a right of privacy, which then finds a place for a woman to have a right to an abortion and to kind of protect her own body. So all of that's to say, Father, that the new Supreme Court nominee for Donald Trump, Amy Coney Barrett, is, we know that the issue on the Democrats' mind is really one issue. It's abortion. And they might pick her apart for different things, but in these hearings, we know that the biggest threat to them is that Roe v. Wade would be overturned with a conservative court. I don't know if it will be or not, but even in the voters' conscience, when they're going and voting, if they're thinking about voting for Joe Biden, they don't get to just say, well, I'm not pro-life. I just like Joe Biden's other issues here, because even in the judicial appointments, this issue of pro-life, the respect for life, the dignity of human life, it's going to be a very, very prominent issue, not just by Donald Trump showing up at the March for Life, but in his Supreme Court nominees and all his other federal court appointees. So any comment on that particular thing of the pro-life issue finds its way, especially in judicial appointees?
Yes, I think you're, putting a spotlight on judicial activism is so important, because when we have judges who feel compelled to become lawmakers, although that is not their place in our system of government, then not only should we always be careful who is a judge, but that raises particular attention among the faithful to say, okay, well, we have to be really careful, because if we get the wrong person, this person wouldn't just be a bad judge, but this person is a pseudo lawgiver that in many respects, especially with the Supreme Court, has no check or balance, which completely violates our entire system of government as a democratic republic. I will say, as you describe, the approach of some in terms of their defense of abortion, whenever I hear and I see these strategies and machinations and so on, it makes me wonder who are the ones who are truly are the ones of a one issue, right? Because for us, we approach life as a preeminent issue, and then everything else flows from it. And it does flow from it. We're concerned about poverty, and we're concerned about, the treatment of prisoners, and we're concerned about, war, and we're concerned about all these areas, but they flow from the preeminent issue of life. But oftentimes we could find people that are so obsessed with abortion that there are no other real issues. And it's like, and it's interesting to just step back and say, who are the ones that really have only one issue? And oftentimes I have found it's not the ones that people think. I will say this, quoting some of our Catholic writers, just so the faithful can understand when we talk about this obsession with abortion, that abortion has been described as the anti-Eucharist of the unbeliever. So just as the Eucharist is the summit and source of our life, it's everything we are, we will die in its defense. So that is how they approach abortion, because it's the ultimate false radical expression of freedom, that a mother can take her own child's life and it's legal and there are no consequences. You can see how that is just the utter pit of hell in terms of that false understanding of freedom and that exercise of supposed freedom.
That's some strong stuff. As we start to kind of wrap up here, Father, a couple questions. One, if somebody has voted for a pro-choice Democrat, must they go to confession?
I would say
I shouldn't even say Democrat. I just mean pro-choice candidate.
I'd say if a member of the faithful has voted for a person who is pro-choice, I would recommend that they bring that up in their confession. If they voted for that person because they were pro-choice, then, as I mentioned earlier, that person is excommunicated. The difference there, someone might say, well, I voted for this person, I didn't like their views on abortion, but I thought everything else was pretty good. Again, that proportionalism. Well, that still shows a moral defect and an understanding of moral truth that the graces of confession can help to build up and help that person understand moral truth better. That's a little different than the person who says, I voted for this candidate because they were pro-choice. That intentional decision, because they're pro-choice, that's an excommunication. That's a removal from the body of believers.
You don't get worse than that. I don't know how you get worse than excommunication in this earth. So a politician, a Catholic politician, whether they're in the Senate or the Congress, or whether they're on the Supreme Court passing pro-life legislation. Sorry, it shouldn't be legislation. Passing, judicial opinions that defend the pro-choice side and restrict the pro-life legislation. can those individuals receive our Lord and the Eucharist? Can they go to communion?
Okay, so that's a great question. I want to draw one distinction that's really important. So, in terms of executive offices, such as the president and vice president, in terms of legislative offices, members of Congress, members of the Senate, if a Catholic holds those offices and votes for pro-choice legislation, they are to be excommunicated. That's clear. It was made clear. It's crystal clear, right? The local bishop is to.
So there's a lot of excommunicated politicians up there in D.C. right now.
Well, the sad part with this is that it's not formally done by the local bishop. So
right.
Oftentimes, again, we were speaking earlier as to why it would not. Again, it's a question mark. Now, I will say,
do they excommunicate themselves and the bishop just recognizes it, or does it not really happen unless the bishop goes boom?
In that case, with the politician, it has to be a formal act.
I see.
So, yeah. Now, I will say that in terms of the judiciary, there is some flexibility in terms of the church understands that, and again, this shows how the church respects authority, that for those who are in the judiciary, if they are bound by a certain law and their task is to interpret the law, then at times they have to give decisions that grieve them, but they are bound by the law that they are given. And again, that just is the church saying that you receive this authority, you have to exercise the authority you've been given and not overstep. So the church would say no activism. So in that case, if a judge has to give a decision that might support the pro-choice cause, that Catholic judge does not bear the guilt of a Catholic executive or a Catholic member of Congress or Senate.
No, that's a great distinction. There you have kind of, two moral issues kind of working at the same time. But yeah, I mean, the judge's moral responsibility is to fulfill their office. Now, they're not pulling the trigger themselves, they're not, but to just simply, I mean, the judge's role is supposed to just to say, this is what the law is. This is what the law says. I don't like it, but this is what it is.
Yes.
But the legislature is passing that law, and so that's a great distinction.
Which, just on a quick aside, which is why in the past, especially for example, with laws of equality and various things in terms of pre-civil rights movement, during the civil rights movement, you will have opinions from the Supreme Court of the United States calling on Congress to please change the law, because they're bound by the law that they are given.
Well, in conclusion, I will paraphrase St. John Chrysostom, and many people sort of know this quote, but I recently found it and found the more complete version of the quote. And it goes something like this: the road to hell is paved with the skulls of priests and deacons, but the lampposts lining the road is atop with the skulls of bishops lighting the way. That's powerful stuff. And I tend to think, Father, that at their particular judgments, they're going to find that their silence on these issues, or their acceptance, or the handing out of communion, or the lack of excommunication for Catholic politicians who have killed millions and millions of unborn children, millions of children throughout their political career. I think that they're going to be shocked. And, I heard once, this is a little aside too, I heard that saints have come back to the living and said, if I could, these are people in heaven now, if I could come back and suffer 100 years on earth, great suffering, just to increase the glory of heaven by just a little bit, I would relive my entire life just to increase my my happiness of heaven by just a little bit. If that's the case, just imagine how regretful some of these priests and deacons and bishops will be for not holding the Catholic politicians responsible for this. And I think I don't want to be there. But you, Father, have always preached the truth from the pulpit. You lead your parishioners. You teach them the church teaching, and you do it in a charitable way, but in a strong way that can wake them up if they're sleepy in the pew. So it's awesome, and I thank you for everything you do at that parish, which my wife and the kids miss since we moved away. And I thank you for being here and helping our TAN audience see the preeminence of the pro-life issue. So thanks a lot, Father. God bless you.
Thank you, Connor. Take care.